I grew up in a suburb just outside of Chicago. If you had looked at my life from the outside, you might have thought it was picture perfect. We had a decent house, food was always on the table, and my parents were present enough to keep up appearances. Teachers at school saw me as just another kid from the neighborhood, maybe a little quieter than most, maybe a little more intense when I played basketball at recess. But if you had looked behind the curtains of our home, you would have seen a very different story, one built on secrets, silence, and pain that no child should ever have to carry. My father was the biggest shadow in my life. He carried himself like an ordinary working man, but anger was always just beneath the surface. He was secretive, withdrawn, and unpredictable. Sometimes he played the role of the caring dad, giving me things I wanted, even being generous. Other times, he shifted into something cruel and unrecognizable. I didn't understand it as a child, but as I got older, I realized what I had lived through was not discipline or strict parenting. It was abuse. The kind that scars you so deeply you end up doubting your own memories. By the time I was 12, my parents divorced. My mom was angry a lot and she yelled, but she also tried to protect me in her own way. My dad, for all his faults, suddenly turned sweet in those years, almost like he was competing for my affection. I chose to live with him, not because he was safer, but because at the time he seemed less chaotic than my mom. Looking back, I realized I was walking into a trap of denial, choosing familiarity over freedom. School became both a refuge and a stage where I tried to prove myself. I discovered basketball, and it lit a fire inside me. On the court, I wasn't the scared kid hiding in his room or trying to keep the peace at home. I was fierce, strong, relentless. I wasn't the most strategic player, but I was raw energy, diving for rebounds, blocking shots, sometimes even dunking before most kids my age could. Coaches noticed, teammates respected me, and for a few hours at practice, I felt alive. Basketball was therapy before I knew what therapy was, but the darkness never really left. Even during games when adrenaline was high, flashes of memory would surface, shadows of my father's rage, fragments of nights I wanted to forget. I'd push them down, telling myself to man up. That phrase haunted me through adolescence. When I was 14, I found a safe haven at a friend's house. His mom welcomed me like one of her own. My basketball uniforms, my school clothes, even some of my personal stuff ended up staying there. It became easier to live at their place than my own. They offered me stability, but even then, I carried the invisible baggage of my past. I learned to smile, crack jokes, pretend I was just another teenager figuring life out. Inside, though, I was drowning. By 15, I began experimenting with substances. At first, it was just to fit in, to quiet the noise in my head, to feel something other than the constant hum of anxiety and shame. Weed, pills, whatever was around, I didn't think much of it. I told myself I could handle it. I was still a student, still a player, still in control. But the truth is, I was already slipping. Addiction rarely starts with a single dramatic moment. It creeps in slowly, turning coping mechanisms into chains. At home, my father continued to wield his silent power. He was never convicted for the things I later confronted him about, but the damage was already done. I repressed many of the worst memories until I was much older. Still, I knew something was wrong. Even as a teenager, I'd feel my stomach twist whenever he looked at me too long or tried to act like we were buddies. What made it worse was the confusion. He wasn't a monster all the time. Sometimes he laughed with me. Sometimes he gave me freedom. Sometimes he acted proud of my basketball skills. That inconsistency kept me trapped. Kids will do almost anything to believe their parents love them, even if it means rewriting reality in their heads. I clung to the good moments because admitting the bad ones would have meant admitting my whole childhood was poisoned. By 16, the cracks in my facade were getting harder to hide. I was good at basketball, but my grades were slipping. I stayed out late, lied about where I was, and avoided home whenever possible. Anger built up inside me, sometimes spilling into fights at school. I was known as tough, someone you didn't want to mess with. But toughness is often just fear in disguise. I wish I could say I reached out for help, but the truth is I didn't. I didn't trust adults. I didn't trust authority. And I certainly didn't trust my parents. So I turned to what felt available: substances, adrenaline, and the escape of the basketball court. That was my reality, two different worlds colliding. On the surface, a kid with talent and potential. Underneath, a young boy carrying secrets too heavy to bear. Those early years set the stage for everything that came after. My choices, my struggles with addiction, my identity questions, my relationships. All of them were rooted in the soil of that childhood. Trauma doesn't just disappear when you turn 18. It follows you into adulthood, shaping the way you see yourself, the way you love, the way you trust. Looking back now, I see that part one of my life wasn't just about surviving, it was about building the mask I wore for years. A mask of toughness, of humor, of I've got this. But beneath it, I was a kid crying out for help in ways no one knew how to hear. I had a best friend around that time. His family became my second family. I practically lived in their house. His mom called me her son, and for a while I almost believed I had escaped my past. But the truth is, you can change your address, you can eat dinner at someone else's table, but you can't outrun the shadows in your head. After high school, everything fell apart fast. Without basketball to ground me, the void grew. I found myself on the streets of Chicago, Garfield Park, Austin, Cicero, learning the rhythms of a world I wasn't prepared for. Drugs weren't just something to take anymore. They became currency, survival, identity. Heroin came first. At the beginning, I sniffed it, convincing myself I wasn't like the real addicts. But that illusion didn't last. I learned how to shoot up, and from that moment, the spiral deepened. I chased the high, chased the numbness, chased the version of myself that didn't feel broken every second of the day. Crack followed. Short bursts of euphoria that ended in darker crashes. It wasn't glamorous. People think street life is fast cars and quick money, but it was dirty apartments, cold nights, and constant paranoia. It was knowing the cops might stop you any second, or that a deal could go wrong in a heartbeat. It was watching friends disappear into prison cells or coffins and pretending like you weren't next in line. I used to think I was smarter than other addicts. I told myself I was in control, that I wasn't like the ones nodding off on street corners. But addiction doesn't care about intelligence. It eats at you bit by bit until the mirror shows you someone you swore you'd never become. My adoptive family, the one that had taken me in as a teenager, knew I was struggling, but they didn't know the full extent. How could they? I became good at hiding things, smiling when I had to, lying when I needed to, stealing when it came down to it. Shame was my constant companion. I hated myself, but I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to quit, I relapsed. 50, 60, maybe 70 times. I'd swear this was the last high, the last needle, the last line, and then a week later I'd be back in the same cycle. The street doesn't let go easy. I wasn't just killing my body. I was killing every relationship I had. Girlfriends came and went, unable to handle the chaos. Friends I grew up with cut me off, tired of the lies. Even the people who loved me the most started to look at me with disappointment instead of hope. And deep down, I couldn't blame them. But there were moments, tiny flickers, that told me I wasn't gone completely. Playing pickup basketball, for example. Even when I was using, I sometimes dragged myself onto a court. For an hour, I could pretend I was still that kid who had talent, who had drive, who had a future. My body remembered even when my mind was clouded. It reminded me I wasn't just an addict. I was still human. Around 22, I started to confront more of my past. Memories I had buried came rushing back. The costumes my father forced me to wear, the humiliation, the voices, the recordings. I realized that my drug use wasn't random. It was me trying to master what had been done to me. Some survivors choose silence, some choose anger, some like me try to drown it all out. But the truth always floats back to the surface. That realization scared me more than the drugs ever did. Because suddenly I knew I wasn't just fighting addiction. I was fighting trauma. Trauma doesn't loosen its grip easily. It reshapes the way you see the world, the way you trust people, the way you even understand your own body. By 23, I was hitting rock bottom. Friends overdosed, others vanished into prison. I saw my own future written in their stories. I didn't want to be a corpse or a number in a system. I wanted out. But wanting out and finding the strength to get out are two very different things. I started trying again, harder this time. Detox programs, failed attempts, relapses, small victories. I lifted weights, played basketball again, tried yoga, tried meditation. For every step forward, there were 2 steps back. But something was shifting. Slowly, painfully, I was realizing that if I didn't change, I wouldn't survive. Looking back, those years were a blur of needles, broken promises, and endless nights. But they were also the years that forced me to face the truth. My childhood trauma and my addiction were 2 sides of the same coin. I couldn't heal one without confronting the other. And for the first time, I was beginning to believe I might deserve more than just survival. When I finally began clawing my way out of the pit of drugs, I thought things would get easier. I thought sobriety would solve everything. But the truth is, getting clean is only the first battle. What comes after? The silence, the memories, the way trauma waits for you in the quiet hours, that's an entirely different war. As I sobered up, parts of myself I had buried for years began resurfacing. I had always been a little different growing up. Long hair, earrings, a softer side that other boys made fun of. Back then I shut it down. I became tougher, meaner, harder, because that's what the world demanded. But inside, something never sat right. There was always this tension between who I was and who I thought I needed to be. That tension turned into what people now call gender dysphoria. I didn't have the words for it at the time, but I knew I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. In the midst of my drug addiction, it hit me the hardest. I began experimenting with how I looked, how I identified. I came out as transgender in my early 20s, and for a while it felt like a release. Like maybe I had found the missing puzzle piece. I even had a boyfriend during that period, one of the smartest, kindest people I've ever met. He was patient with me even when I was deep in my addiction. He's one of the reasons I got sober. When I relapsed, he didn't abandon me. He stayed, believing I could be better, even when I didn't believe it myself. But being intimate with him unlocked something darker. Memories I had shoved deep down came back with full force. It wasn't just about attraction. It was about trauma. Every time I tried to be close to him, my body rebelled. I'd shake, sweat, even vomit. My mind went back to childhood, to the costumes, to the things my father and his friends forced me to endure. It was like my body was screaming the truth I didn't want to admit, that my past was still controlling me. For a long time, I thought my dysphoria was proof that I was supposed to be someone else, that I was born in the wrong body. But as the memories returned, I started to see it differently. Maybe it wasn't about being born wrong. Maybe it was about being forced into roles, into humiliations, into identities I never chose as a child. Dressing up in little girl outfits, sailor suits, puppy costumes, it wasn't exploration, it was torture. And it twisted my sense of self in ways I'm still trying to untangle. I don't say this to dismiss anyone else's journey. I know many people feel genuine relief and freedom in transitioning. But for me, it became clear that my gender struggles were rooted in trauma, not truth. They were echoes of what had been done to me, not reflections of who I really was. Slowly, painfully, I began stepping back. I stopped presenting as transgender. I started lifting weights again, playing basketball, painting my nails sometimes, but owning the fact that I was a man. And you know what? For the first time in a long time, I felt a little peace. That doesn't mean it was easy. Letting go of that identity was like losing a shield. When I told people I was trans, at least I had an explanation for my pain, a label that made sense in a confusing world. Without it, I had to face the raw truth. I was just a broken man trying to heal. I still wrestle with it, honestly. Some days I wonder who I am, if I'm androgynous, queer, straight, gay. But then I remind myself that life isn't a box to check. Gender, sexuality, identity, they're not fixed points. They're spectrums, shifting, fluid, and maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need to have all the answers right now. What I do know is this. I'm not defined by what my father did to me. I'm not defined by the years I lost to addiction, and I'm not defined by the labels I once clung to. I'm me, a survivor. A man learning to live with scars instead of pretending they aren't there. When I look back at that period, I don't see failure. I see a desperate attempt to find myself in the wreckage of my past. I see someone trying to turn pain into identity, confusion into clarity, and even though it wasn't the right answer for me, it was part of my journey, a chapter I had to live through to get to where I am now. Sobriety didn't magically erase my trauma. Transitioning didn't either. What has helped, what continues to help, is honesty. Brutal, painful honesty with myself about what I've endured, what I've lost, and who I still want to become. This chapter of my life wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about unlearning the lies my trauma taught me and daring to believe I could exist without hiding behind labels. The hardest truth I've ever had to face is that healing is not a straight line. It's not like you wake up one morning and everything suddenly makes sense. Some days you feel strong, other days the memories drag you right back into the pit you thought you had escaped. For me, that truth became undeniable when I lost my brother. He wasn't my biological brother, but in every way that mattered, he was family. We grew up side by side, finishing each other's sentences, living through the chaos of addiction together. We had both tried to get sober, sometimes even managing to do it at the same time. But addiction is cruel, and while I managed to pull myself back, he didn't. His drug of choice was different from mine: alcohol and Xanax. I never touched much Xanax because I knew how dangerous it was, but he couldn't escape it. He tried to quit cold turkey once, and it nearly killed him. After a hospital stay, he came out changed, nervous, anxious, like a shadow of himself. I could see the fear in his eyes even when he tried to laugh it off, and then one night he was gone. An overdose, a combination of alcohol, pills, and something as stupid as air duster. I wasn't there when he took his last breath, but I saw him in those final moments before the ambulance came. I'll never forget it. That image is burned into my memory. The sound of him struggling, the look on his face, the silence that followed. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't just break your heart, it rearranges your soul. When he died, part of me went with him. He had been my mirror, my anchor, the one person who truly understood the madness in my head. Without him, I felt like I was drifting with no direction, and yet his death also forced me to make a choice. I could follow him into the grave, or I could fight harder than I ever had before to live. For the first time, sobriety wasn't just about me. It was about honoring him, carrying his memory forward, refusing to let his story end in vain. But even as I tried to hold on, the memories of my childhood came back stronger. Trauma has a way of resurfacing when you're most vulnerable. I'd be lying awake at night, and suddenly I'd see my father's face, hear his laugh, feel the humiliation all over again. Sometimes the dreams were so vivid that I'd wake up drenched in sweat, shaking like I was back in that room. That's when I started turning to meditation and yoga. It wasn't easy. Sitting with myself after years of running felt unbearable. But slowly I learned how to breathe through the flashbacks, how to ground myself when the past tried to pull me under. For the first time, I wasn't trying to erase the memories with drugs. I was trying to survive them sober. There were moments of unexpected grace, too. One night, after taking a small dose of psilocybin mushrooms, I felt something I never thought possible: pity for my father. I cried for him, not because I forgave him, but because I finally saw how broken he must have been to do the things he did. It didn't last, and I can't say I've fully forgiven him, but in that moment, I understood that carrying hate forever would destroy me more than it would ever touch him. Still, forgiveness doesn't come easy. Especially not when I remember confronting him years later, phone in hand, recording as I pushed him for the truth. He leaned into the camera, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "So what? Get over it." I did it. Those words cut deeper than anything he had ever done physically, because they showed me he wasn't sorry. He never would be, so here I am, torn between rage and the desperate desire to let go. Torn between honoring my brother's memory and not letting my father's shadow define me. Torn between wanting justice and knowing the system rarely gives it to people like me. This chapter of my life is about that tension. The balancing act between grief and healing, between hate and forgiveness, between past and future. I don't always get it right. Some days I still wake up angry. Some days I isolate, afraid that my trauma makes me unlovable. But other days I play basketball, I read books, I stretch on a yoga mat, and I feel a little flicker of hope. Losing my brother nearly destroyed me. But it also gave me a reason to keep going. Because if I quit now, if I let the drugs win, if I let the hate consume me, then his death would mean nothing. And I can't allow that. People like to think survival has a clear finish line, that one day you wake up and the past doesn't matter anymore, that the pain just fades into the background. But that's not how it works. Survival is daily. It's a choice I make every single morning when I open my eyes and decide not to go back to the needle. Not to drown in bitterness, not to let the darkness win. I'm 29 now, and for the first time in my life I can say I've been sober for a few solid years. That doesn't mean I don't stumble. I've relapsed more times than I can count, and there are still nights when the urge whispers in my ear. But I've learned to fight differently. I lift weights. I play basketball. I meditate, I read. These aren't just hobbies, they're lifelines. They keep me tethered to the present when the past tries to pull me under. I've also found a kind of purpose in giving back. I've volunteered at women's shelters, domestic violence homes, places where I see reflections of my own story in the eyes of strangers. Sometimes I imagine what my life might have been like if my mom had a safe place to go when I was little, if she'd had the strength to leave my dad for good. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe I wouldn't be sitting here with these scars. But imagining doesn't change reality. What I can do is try to be that safe place for someone else. Still, fear lingers. My biggest fear isn't relapse, it's myself. Traumatized people often become their own worst enemies, and I know how easy it would be for me to sabotage everything I've built. Isolation is dangerous for me. Anger is dangerous. Carrying hate in my chest is like drinking poison and expecting my father to suffer. That's why forgiveness, as impossible as it sometimes feels, is something I keep chasing. Not for him, for me. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive him. How do you forgive someone who laughed while destroying your childhood? Who admitted what he did without shame, almost proud? Some days I think I can. Other days the anger is too raw. What I've learned is that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process, one I may spend my entire life working through. I've tried therapy. Some of it helped, some of it didn't. What's helped most is yoga, meditation, and the teachers who've guided me through breathing when the flashbacks come. They remind me that healing isn't about erasing what happened. It's about carrying it differently. It's about saying, yes, this happened. Yes, it broke me. But it doesn't get to own me anymore. Do I feel happy today? Happier, yes. The happiest I've ever been? Probably not. My happiest days were with my brother, before the world stole him from me. Nothing will bring him back, and I'll carry that grief forever. But I can honor him by living. By staying clean. By refusing to let our story end in tragedy. I think a lot about the concept of love. For a long time I didn't believe in it. How could I after what I'd seen? But slowly I've started to believe again. Not in the fairy tale kind of love, but in the love we show by being present, by listening, by refusing to let someone disappear into silence. That kind of love saved me more than once. And if there's one message I want to leave behind, it's this. Survivors aren't broken beyond repair. We're not defined by what was done to us. We're not doomed to repeat the past. We're proof that even in the darkest places, light can survive. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if I'll ever fully heal, or if the memories will always be there whispering in the back of my mind. But I do know this. I'm not a victim anymore. I'm not just a product of trauma. I'm a man who lived through hell and found a way to keep walking. Every day I wake up sober is a victory. Every time I breathe through a flashback instead of reaching for a drug is a victory. Every moment I choose compassion over hate is a victory. And maybe those small victories are enough. Maybe they're what survival really means.